My name is Pamela. Last Saturday, I stood in the middle of a room filled with relatives, my heart pounding as I announced that I'd just closed on my first house. The room fell silent for a moment, and then my father, Mr. Thompson, stood up. With a sneer on his face, he raised his glass and laughed. Pamela, this house isn't yours. You're just a cash cow for this family. Nothing you buy will ever truly be yours. The whole room burst into laughter. My mother, Mrs. Thompson, clapped her hands, and my younger sister, Lily, smirked and said, "Finally, we get something nice." They toasted as if it was the funniest joke they'd ever heard. I sat there, my hands shaking under the table, as they celebrated stealing my future. But what they didn't know was that I'd been waiting for this moment for years. To understand how I got to this point, I have to take you back to my childhood. I grew up in a small town in Vermont. My family ran a local antique shop, and while it seemed like a normal family business on the surface, there was a dark side. My parents always favored Lily. She was the delicate one, the one who needed special attention. When I was 12, I got my first job delivering newspapers. I worked hard every morning before school, and at the end of the month, I received my first paycheck for $150. I was so proud. I remember the feeling of holding that check in my hands, imagining all the things I could do with the money. But my father had other plans. He took me to the local bank and explained that we were opening a savings account in my name. He'd be the co-owner, he said, to protect me. I was just a child, and I trusted him. I signed the papers without really understanding what I was doing. That was the beginning of my financial exploitation. As I got older, my mother introduced a family contributions system. Every month, I had to give her $50 for household expenses. Lily, on the other hand, didn't have to contribute a single cent. When I asked why, my mother would say, "Lily is more fragile than you. You're strong, you can handle it." Family helps family. I went to college on a partial scholarship. I worked part-time at a local cafe to make ends meet. I still sent money home every month because my parents always said they needed it. When I graduated, I landed a job as an interior designer at a well-known firm. My starting salary was $65,000 a year. I was so excited to finally be independent, but my parents didn't see it that way. My father called me a few weeks after I started the job and told me to start wiring $1,000 a month into the joint account. He didn't ask if I could afford it, he just told me it was my responsibility. One night, I needed $200 for a work-related expense. I went to the ATM and checked my account balance. To my horror, there was only $50 left. I'd transferred $1,500 into the account just a week before. I called my father, and he simply said, I had to use the money for something important. You'll get it back. I was devastated, but I didn't say anything. Lily, meanwhile, was living a completely different life. She got a brand new car when she turned 18, paid for by my parents. She went to a private art school on a fully paid scholarship, which my parents somehow managed to arrange. When she dropped out after a year, they didn't seem to care. In 2023, I came home for a visit and saw my mother's credit card statement on the coffee table. There were charges for expensive jewelry, designer clothes, and fancy dinners. Beside each line, there was a note, Elle's allowance. I realized that my money was not only supporting the family but also funding Lily's luxurious lifestyle. That same year, Lily got into trouble. She had a drug problem and was arrested for possession. My parents asked me to pay her bail and the legal fees, which amounted to $8,000. I was reluctant, but I did it because I thought that's what a good daughter should do. But then, something happened that changed everything. One day, I was driving around the countryside, feeling lost and overwhelmed. I ended up in a small village called Maplewood. There, I saw a beautiful old cottage for sale. It was a charming place with a garden and a view of the mountains. I took a picture of the for sale sign and drove home. That night, I couldn't stop thinking about the cottage. I decided to open a secret savings account at a different bank. I started automatically transferring 40% of my paycheck into it. I continued sending the $1,000 a month to my parents' joint account so they wouldn't suspect anything. Over the next year, my savings grew. By the middle of 2024, I had $90,000 in my secret account. I contacted a real estate agent and made an offer on the cottage. The asking price was $450,000, and my offer of $420,000 was accepted. I was so excited, but I knew I had to keep it a secret. My parents found out about the house through a neighbor. My mother called me, her voice full of anger. "Why are you buying a house without telling us? This is not how a family should operate." My father called later, trying to be calm but still pressuring me to think about the family. Around this time, my uncle, Mr. Henry Thompson, started acting strangely. He was my father's younger brother. He'd always been a quiet, unassuming man. But at a family gathering in late 2024, he looked at me and said, "Some things take time, Pamela. Don't let anyone rush you." A few months later, he called me at work. He asked me about the closing date of the house, the name of my lender, and my real estate agent. He told me not to tell my father. I was confused but didn't think much of it at the time. On my 28th birthday, my uncle came to my office. He had a leather briefcase with him. He asked to talk to me in private. We went to a small conference room, and he sat down across from me. He was crying. He told me that our grandfather, who had passed away when I was 10, had left a trust for me. He explained that our grandfather had sold his antique shop in the city for $400,000 before he died. He'd established an irrevocable trust named after my grandmother, Mrs. Rose Thompson. The trust was set to release funds when I turned 28. The trust had grown over the years to $1,800,000. On the closing date of my house, the trust would wire $300,000 into the escrow account. The remainder would be held for me until I was 30 and then 35. He gave me a folder with all the trust documents, including a letter from my grandfather. I was in shock. I read the letter from my grandfather. He wrote about how he knew my parents were taking advantage of me, and he wanted to make sure I had a secure future. He said that he'd always loved me and that I was the one who had the strength to build a life for myself. I closed on the house as planned. I didn't tell my parents about the trust. A few days later, I told them about the house at a family dinner. That's when my father made his cruel speech. But as he was speaking, my uncle stood up. He pushed his chair back and said, "Robert, sit down." My father was stunned. He didn't understand what was happening. My uncle opened his briefcase and took out a folder. He showed my parents the trust documents. He read the first line aloud, "Pursuant to the irrevocable directive of the grantor, Mr. George Thompson, dated May 5, 2014, this trust is hereby established for the sole benefit of Pamela Thompson, granddaughter of the grantor." The room fell silent. My mother's face turned pale, and Lily dropped her glass. My father tried to argue, saying it was a misunderstanding, but my uncle showed him the reasons why my grandfather had set up the trust. He'd written that my father had a history of mismanaging money and that he didn't want me to be a victim of his financial irresponsibility. I looked at my sister and said, "Lily, you've been living off my money all these years. It's time you realized that." She sat there, speechless. My father then tried to plead with me, saying that we were still a family and that we could work things out. But I'd had enough. I stood up and said, "For 28 years, I thought family meant I had to sacrifice everything for you. But I was wrong. I'm not your retirement plan. I'm not your safety net." I told them that my attorney would close the joint checking account at the bank and that she would send them a cease and desist letter regarding my house. I walked out of the house, with my uncle by my side. A few days later, my sister called me. She asked if I knew about the trust before the dinner. I told her the truth. She said she needed to figure out who she was without relying on our parents' money. My father sent me a letter, but it was full of excuses, not an apology. I didn't respond. I kept the folder with the trust documents and my grandfather's letter safe. Now, I'm living in my cottage in Maplewood. I wake up every morning to the sound of birds and the view of the mountains. I've hung my grandfather's letter on the wall, and beside it, I've placed a picture of him and me when I was a little girl. The house is truly mine, and I know that the only things worth having are the ones that are given with love, not taken through guilt.